Communication belatedly received the news and, with a completely pale face, hurriedly ran towards the duo. Hunters. Canada is. The rest of his sentence didn't need to be heard at this point. When Jinwoo glared upwards, the gate covering up the sky was already disappearing from the view as if it had served its purpose now. The Dragon Emperor slowly closed its eyes and opened its arms wide to enjoy its own freedom. The pounding heartbeats of all living things, and their dying screams, the noises of all creations being destroyed continued to ring out like a wonderful symphony. It was then, accompanied by ancient great dragons powerfully landing on the ground, 2 other sovereigns gently landed in front of them. The Dragon Emperor let out a roar of laughter powerful enough to shake the land and shouted out towards the monsters still pouring out from the gate. Hundreds of dragons flew above its head next, and vicious flames rained down from their maws to burn away every single thing on the ground. The director of the Hunter Bureau, David Brennan, found himself sitting alone in his office with all lights switched off. While ignoring the endless streams of reports flooding into his desk as well as the incoming calls from the higher-ups, inside his darkened office, images inside the muted TV screen flickered and danced. Monsters could be seen briefly in those images. He knew why the TV station covering the breaking news was playing the exact same footage over and over again. Because they are all dead by now. Just like every single Hunter Bureau agent sent there to support the Canadian hunters. Not one person would have survived that. Hunters, agents, reporters, and cameramen filming the scene. Every one of them dead. Thankfully, though, a cameraman risked his life and did his job, resulting in short footage that at least helped everyone with understanding the scale of the enemy's invading force. It's all over. The director suddenly yelled out like a madman. Hunter Seong Jinwoo wasn't exaggerating back then. Dragons alone numbered in the hundreds. Behind those, giants, beasts, and insect-like things rushed out like tidal waves. They were creatures of calamity that mankind simply could never fight against. He now understood the reason why Hunter Seong Jinwoo repeatedly told everyone in no uncertain terms to distance themselves as far away from the gates. This world was now over. But, still, what a crazy bastard. Didn't Seong Jinwoo go to China with his summons in order to fight against creatures like that? How could he even think about fighting against them when he knew that such monsters existed? As the director's face paled like a man seeing a scary ghost, Jinwoo quietly spoke to him. "I'm looking for something." What could he possibly be looking for when the world was facing certain annihilation? No, besides all that, was the man in front of the director's eyes the real Hunter Seong Jinwoo to begin with? Wondering if he got too drunk and was seeing things, the director roughly shook his head from side to side. But Jinwoo's figure became even clearer and in focus from that action. "What are you looking for?" "The rune stone." Jinwoo told the director precisely what he was here for. "The rune stone from Kamish, give it to me." His surprise lasted only for a short while. The director reflexively shook his head. "As you may well know, Hunter Nim, the Kamish's rune stone is the Hunter Bureau's." That was when his words came to a choking halt. This DMN work-related habit of his. What about the Hunter Bureau? So what? Never mind the Bureau. The whole of the United States of America was about to go up in flames. So who cared about a measly little rune stone now? Looks like I haven't fully woken up from the booze yet. The director loudly slapped his cheeks with his palms. After his skin reddened up from the stinging impact, he finally felt as if his brain was getting in gear. His once blurry eyes regained their focus as well. He then arrived at a certain conclusion that to the Hunter Bureau, no, to the entire United States of America, the reason why Jinwoo wanted the rune stone in the first place was far more important than its financial value. A short bout of deliberation later, the director asked cautiously as to not sour Jinwoo's moods. "I can definitely give you the rune stone, but why do you need it?" Without a single shred of hesitation, Jinwoo replied back, "I'll use it as a tool for my counter-attack." Through the eyes of the system, Jinwoo got to confirm the skill sleeping within the rune stone in question pretty early on. It definitely contained a certain power of a dragon. There was a reason why he showed no interest whatsoever to this rune stone until now, though. This skill had a rather serious drawback, meaning it was a power he didn't need. However, the story has changed now. After descending to the 9th underground floor of the Hunter Bureau's HQ, the director and Jinwoo now stood before the reinforced glass case that housed the rune stone in question. "Hunter Nim, you once told me that the monsters of the dungeons were sent here by the beings called the Rulers, didn't you?" "Yes, I did." "In that case, what are these rune stones found inside the bodies of the monsters?" "They are gifts from the rulers to enable humanity to hunt monsters down more efficiently." What the rulers wanted was to spread mana around this world through violent clashes between monsters and mankind. The sacrifices made by humans were simply a side effect, not their true end goal. Indeed, these rune stones inserted into the monsters so, upon their deaths, their powers could be sealed within, were the sign of the ruler's consideration towards mankind's monster hunting. And so, Kamish's power was stored within this stone. Jinwoo took hold of the dragon's power that would play the crucial role in his fight back. The director tensely observed Jinwoo grasping the rune stone tightly and swallowed his dry saliva. Truly, can you truly stop the monsters with that thing? Well, I should at least give it a shot. Even at this very moment, the armies led by the Dragon Emperor were repeating the actions of destroying everything in their paths, and advancing forward before stopping to destroy some more. Thanks to the mana from the rulers fortifying the planet, the marching speed of the army of destruction had been pegged back somewhat. But that would only last for a short while. Soon, every inch of this land would be engulfed in the conflagration of war. There is something else as well. I'm looking for a person now. We're here. Jinwoo nodded his head, because the director simply led the visitor straight into the apartment. I didn't expect you to pay me a visit during such times. Jinwoo took a step forward and politely bowed his head towards the middle-aged woman. The moment she took a look at his entire being, she failed to stop the shocked gasp from bursting out of her mouth. Oh my gosh, he looked completely different from the last time she saw him. You're not the same person as the one I know. Her eyes began trembling fearfully. Back then, the darkness had been hiding deep within him somewhere, but now, he had become the perfect darkness itself. She could clearly see the power of death enveloping Jinwoo. However, he quickly shook his head and corrected her misunderstanding. I'm still the same person you know, madam, except that I've become one with the darkness you saw inside me. Which words in the known vocabulary would be adequate enough to describe this truly wondrous development? Madam, you said that you can glimpse into the future, yes. To a certain extent, yes. In that case, can you tell me about my future? Before he was about to enter the battle properly, he wanted to see the end through her eyes first. He thought that, regardless of what she saw, he'd be more relaxed going in. Madame Selner hesitated somewhat before she nodded her head slowly. She reached out and grasped both of Jinwoo's hands and closed her eyes. To look deeper into the inner workings of the darkness, she needed a big dollop of courage for that. However, she couldn't dare to refuse the request of a warrior about to go to war against the foes that required a far greater level of courage than hers. No, the level of courage required would be so great that it defied all attempts to compare it. The time flew past as if it was merely a moment, and when she finally opened her eyes, uncontrollable tears began trickling down her cheeks. Are you really going to carry all that burden by yourself? Jinwoo didn't answer her. But how can it be? How can just one person carry all those terrible burdens? Are you going to sacrifice one to save everyone? Jinwoo's expression brightened. Sounds like I can at least get that far. That's a relief. What do you mean, you're relieved? No one will be able to remember you. You'll end up fighting a lonesome battle all by yourself. Jinwoo let go of her hands as she tried to dissuade him. Back when he made up his mind to fight, he was already prepared to go that far. He took a step back from Madame and bade farewell in a dignified manner. I'm sorry for coming by unannounced and asking you for something like this. Seong Jinwoo Hunter Nim. Even before her earnestly pleading voice came to an end, Jinwoo slid into the shadow beneath his feet and disappeared from there. Jinwoo closed his eyes and began searching for the Dragon Emperor's aura within that massive army. As it turned out, it wasn't all that difficult to spot the center of the massive power that raged on like a violent storm and swallowing up everything in its wake. Found you. Jinwoo saw the Dragon Emperor. At that moment, the Sovereign of Destruction also saw Jinwoo. That sharp sensory perception that swept past it. There could only be one possessing senses like that. The Dragon Emperor abruptly came to a halt and glared in Jinwoo's direction. Its demonic snake-like eyes didn't shy away from the darkness in the distance for a long while. It had finally sensed the presence of the true enemy that could threaten its existence over yonder. That was why. The Shadow Sovereign and the Sovereign of Destruction glared at each other while transcending past the distance itself. The latter bared its fangs first. Its terrifying roar as loud as hundreds, no, thousands of lightning bolts exploding at the same time resounded throughout the entire planet. Murderous glare flickered for a moment within Jinwoo's eyes. Don't you worry, I'll see you soon. And when I do, Jinwoo swallowed back the words he wanted to say and submerged quietly into the shadow. If one were to transplant hell to earth, would it resemble something like this? The skies were filled with thick black clouds that showed no signs of abating. The ground below was, in turn, filled with blood, screams, ashes, and acrid stink. What is going on with that beastard, I wonder? After that brief stare down, the Shadow Sovereign went into hiding and didn't appear again, even until now. When he used his sensory perception to reveal his existence, the Dragon Emperor took that as the sign of the Shadow Sovereign finally declaring war. And that was why, for the first time in an extremely long while, the Dragon Emperor's heart that went dormant while wandering within the gap between dimensions had begun beating powerfully once again. Finally, one of only a few enemies that could truly threaten its life had bared his fangs at it. The true war was at hand. To the Sovereign of Destruction, the sight of the battlefield filled with sheer, uncontrolled madness from all parties involved was pretty much the same thing as a marvelous gift from the heavens. Too bad, the event it had been waiting for didn't materialize. The Shadow Sovereign vanished without a trace and showed no signs of appearing again even after a nation of his kin had been annihilated completely. Of course, it'd be no different than killing himself to fight against the combined army of the Chaos World that easily numbered in the 10+ millions with just over 100,000 of his servants. However, if he was planning to run away from the get-go, he wouldn't have tried to threaten the Dragon Emperor even at the risk of exposing his current whereabouts. Could he be aiming for something else? The Dragon Emperor grew more anxious as time continued to pass by. Could it be? He's waiting for the annihilation of his kin so he can convert them all into his shadow soldiers. However, turning humans who didn't know how to wield mana into his soldiers wouldn't be much help against the army of destruction. Humans are coming, my liege. But didn't all the humans of this nation capable of wielding mana, hunters, die? If so, what could this be? The Dragon Emperor formed a puzzled expression and raised its head, and with excellent timing, countless missiles rained down from the sky. This was the final struggle of the weak creatures, so pathetically meaningless that even the Sovereign of Destruction felt sorry for them. Humans knew that their weapons not imbued with mana couldn't even touch a single hair on the army of destruction, yet they stubbornly refused to give up. This is getting boring. The brows of the Dragon Emperor quivered slightly. Anxiety morphed into annoyance, and soon, annoyance transformed into anger. The Dragon Emperor warned its underlings not to make a move and for the first time ever since setting foot in this world, revealed its true appearance. These fighter pilots had flown here while risking their lives in order to buy time, however little it'd be for the civilians to evacuate. But then, after seeing the truly nonsensical size of the personified calamity approaching them, every single one of these brave men and women became completely speechless. Mommy, the terror and shock of these pilots only lasted for a brief moment. Soon, the breath of pure destruction fired out in a straight line from the jaw of the calamity, swallowing up all of the fighter jets in the air. In less than 1 minute, the lives of these pilots couldn't even buy 1 minute, and their sacrifice was ultimately in vain. Unfortunately, the Dragon Emperor wasn't satisfied by these human sacrifices and raised its head to spew out a terrifying roar at the heavens. That was the Sovereign of Destruction declaring war against the Shadow Sovereign. Jinwoo also heard that roar. His eyes, closed in stillness so that he could organize his thoughts, quietly opened up. It's time. The moment his eyelids lifted up, the sight of the lodging Beru had constructed immediately entered his view. Darkness and silence seemed to have taken over the dominion of this needlessly humongous room. Was it because the current atmosphere resembled the moments of eternal rest? Jinwoo didn't dislike the combination of darkness and silence as experienced within this empty, wide-open space. He felt guilty about scolding Beru initially after clapping his eyes on this white fortress for the first time back then, so he quietly summoned the former Ant King to his side. Hey, Beru. Thanks. Beru had been silently waiting in Jinwoo's shadow until then. He sneaked his head out of the darkness below to speak. Oh, my king. Yeah, I know. Jinwoo cut off Beru's sentence even before another word could be uttered. This time, Bellion rose up to the surface from the side of the Ant King. It's far too dangerous, my liege. Even Igris emerged from below too, as if he was waiting for this chance. He knelt down and lowered his head, his voice sounding earnest. I share their opinions, my liege. All three marshals were trying to dissuade Jinwoo from enacting his plan. Wordlessly, their master studied the trio. Shadow soldiers would never die unless their sovereign was killed off, which meant that they would always worry about the safety of their sovereign first and foremost. However, sometimes one had no choice but to make a move even though he knew of the dangers waiting for him on the other side. For Jinwoo, this was one such occasion. Osborne, the former Shadow Sovereign, said that he liked this aspect of me. That would be the aspect of him willing to tackle the seemingly dangerous problem head-on first to see what's what. Even though he looked cold and calculating on the outside, Jinwoo continued on. If he was in the same situation as I am now, what would he have done? Bellion recalled the past actions of the former Shadow Sovereign and realized that he couldn't readily provide an answer. Osborne, the former Shadow Sovereign, was someone who stepped up all by himself to try and stop the rebellion of every other fragment of the brilliant light marching forward to kill their creator, the absolute being. If it was him, he'd never give up on his duty regardless of the situation facing him. Once Bellion's thoughts arrived there, he raised his faltering head up high. Jinwoo was smiling back at him. They resemble each other. Jinwoo's face overlapped with that of Osborne's in Bellion's eyes just then. As expected, Bellion lowered his head again and made an earnest pledge towards Jinwoo. I shall accompany you till the end, my liege. It seemed that other marshals shared his sentiment because they no longer bothered to dissuade Jinwoo. Perfect. You should have come out like that from the beginning, you know. Jinwoo grinned refreshingly at them. He felt that there really wasn't much time remaining, and pulled out his phone from the pocket. This might prove to be his last chance to speak to his family. In the end, though, he couldn't bring himself to tap the call icon. He thought that, if he heard the voices of his loved ones now, he'd not be able to take another step forward. That's the feeling he got. The crushed phone slowly fell from Jinwoo's hand. It'd be perfectly fine to delay listening to their voices until the end of the upcoming battle. Wu Jinqiao squeezed his eyes shut. He just didn't feel confident of continuously watching the unfolding tragedy happening on the other side of the planet. Through Jinwoo's memory, he had witnessed the grand scale of the enemy's invading forces. He was being serious here. That was a calamity nothing in this world could defend against. The nation boasting the greatest combat strength, the United States of America, was crumbling helplessly at the hands of those DMN monsters. And right now, the only thing humanity could do was to pray for a miracle. Unfortunately, just what kind of a miracle would it have to be to stop those creatures? Please, I beg of you, don't. Although there would never be a reply, Wu Jinqiao still looked up at the ceiling of his office and whispered softly, "Don't forsake us." A fighter jet's engine was destroyed in an instant and its pilot hurriedly attempted to eject from the plane. As this pilot made his rapid descent towards the ground, he began screaming out in despair as he watched his friends and colleagues getting massacred in the blink of an eye. Booming exploding noises and flashes of fireballs filled up the sky. The pilot continued to cry out the names of his dying friends even as the disorientating chaos pushed his head into a dizzy spin. The ground approached at the rate of knots. Just before he was about to become a flat pancake, his parachute unfurled itself in time. He messily tumbled and rolled around on the ground several times before coming to a stop. Even though the surroundings were filled with the acrid stink of blood and stinging fumes of chemicals, monsters still managed to sense the breathing of a life form from far away and began rushing towards his location. The pilot hurriedly cut himself loose from the parachute straps and yanked out a pistol mounted on his hips. Die, die, you sons of BTs. Several ear-piercing gunshots echoed in the air, but as expected, they were simply inadequate to slow down the monsters by one bit. Now that he ran out of bullets, the pilot instantly began regretting his actions. He should have reserved the last shot for his own final moment. His hands powerlessly sagged to the ground. The very first monster to arrive his location as he stood there dazed and numb was a denizen of the chaos world that resembled a giant cockroach. After seeing the insect-type monster utterly filling up his view, all strength in the pilot's legs abandoned him and he sunk down to the floor. A despairing moan leaked out of his mouth. Right at that moment, all those insects rushing at him were suddenly torn apart at once as if a claw from a gigantic creature took a swipe at them. Jesus Christ! His tearful eyes anxiously sought out the origin of that miracle. And soon, he found a single Asian man gently landing in front of his eyes. Although it was only his back, the pilot found it not too difficult to guess this man's name by looking at the pair of uniquely shaped short swords in his hands. Xiang Jinwoo, Hunter Jinwoo Xiang. Jinwoo took a look at the pilot behind him. There was an incredibly intense scowl on his face that made it hard to tell whether he was an ally or an enemy. But his eyes definitely said, "Run away, now." Sure enough, a horde of monsters far outnumbering the ones that got killed was rushing towards them from the distance. Jinwoo furiously swung Kamish's wraths, resulting in the monsters to get torn apart into bits and pieces like dolls made out of paper. He had cut down dozens upon dozens of enemies with those two attacks, but that was like shaving a tiny piece off a massive iceberg. Enemies hundreds of times greater in number seemed to have latched onto the smell of combat that had taken place here. This would be the first steps of the war. His first victims would be with these insect-type monsters. Jinwoo sucked in a quick but deep breath, and in the direction of the Chaos World's soldiers rushing towards his location, he spat out the two words that would become the turning point in this war. Rise up. As soon as Jinwoo issued his command, All those insect monsters that got torn to shreds just now stood back up as new shadow soldiers. In the past, he also revived monsters that got killed during the battles and added them to his stock of soldiers. But these new additions were on a different scale altogether compared to those guys. Quite far removed from the recent past when the system suppressed the powers of the Shadow Sovereign and resulted in the creation of shadow soldiers that were weaker than their living counterparts. Jinwoo was now the bona fide king of the dead, and the restrictions of the system no longer affected him.